said, you know, though it's kind of true, we have fought so many religious wars over, for example, whether when you eat the bread during communion, it actually turns into the body of Christ, or it's only a symbol of the body of Christ. Tens of thousands of people have been killed for that debate in the history of Europe. Of course, in what we call the great religious wars of the Reformation. Swift obviously playing this game here, right? And again, kids could read it and go, ha ha, that's funny, they fight over which end of the egg to break. Adults read it and go, ooh, that is nasty, because we do fight. Of course, at 3B, we can ask this question really quickly. Last time you had a major fight with somebody, go ahead and ask this question. Was it over something legitimate or over something silly? It's a very interesting question. It's a very disturbing question, because for most of us, if we really think about it, the last time we got in a major fight or an altercation, and then we ask the simple question, was it over something really that serious, or over something kind of silly, we will have to admit, dang it, humans, we fight over the silliest stuff. The silliest stuff can make us get really upset, and then all of a sudden we gotta like go to nasty language or nasty fighting or even wars. And Swift says, why? It seems to be kind of human nature. But does it have to be human nature? That's the essence of his satire. He'll raise this question without ever asking it. Does it really have to be this way? Or can we actually look, the next time we're about to get upset, we can actually look back to this text and go, ha ha, that's like the Lilliputians getting really upset about which end of the egg to break. Dude, I am not going to get in a fight over this. This is totally dumb. Very interesting. These civil commotions were constantly fomented by the monarchs of Blefuscu, and when they were quelled, the exiles always fled for refuge to that empire. It's computed that 11,000 persons have at several times suffered death rather than submit to break their eggs at the smaller end. Again, the joke of all jokes. How many people are killed in the history of Europe over silly, for example, religious wars or whatever, right? Many hundred large volumes have been published upon this controversy, but the books of the bigunders have been long forbidden, and the whole party rendered incapable by law of holding employments. Well, let's just say it out loud. This is our example of book burning, right? Swift is going to say, if you don't like what people have to say, what do? You burn their books, right? And then, of course, usually in the history of the world, you burn them with them, the authors of the books. Of course, we think of Hitler, don't we? One of the first things he did was what? After he rounded up all the people he didn't like, namely the Jews, what did he do? He went and found all their books. Why? He wanted to burn all their books. Craziness, right? Of course, Swift is in some ways a prophet. Think about how ironic it is that 200 years after Swift writes this, the 20th century will see the greatest number of deaths in one century. Over what? The most silly of differences, right? Let's keep reading. During the course of these troubles, the emperors of Blefuscu did frequently expostulate by their ambassadors, accusing us of making a schism in religion by offending against the fundamental doctrine of our great prophet Lustrog in the 54th chapter of the, and then again here we're just kind of making fun, right? The Brunacral, which is their Alcorian. This, however, that he's saying the Bible. In other words, these debates about how you're supposed to read the Bible. This, however, is thought to be a mere strain upon the text, for the words are these: that all true believers shall break their eggs at the convenient end, which is the convenient end seems, in my humble opinion, to be left to every man's conscience, or at least in the power of the chief magistrate to determine. Now the bigender exiles have found so much credit in the emperor of Blefuscu's court, and so much private assistance and encouragement from their party here at home, that a bloody war hath been carried on between the two empires for 36 moons, with various success, during which time we have lost 40 capital ships, and a much greater number of smaller vessels, together with 30,000 of our best seamen and soldiers, and the damage received by the enemy is reckoned to be somewhat greater than ours. Let's go ahead and point it out in your notes at 2A really quickly. He points out, every time we have major wars, economic stress, terrible. Look at the numbers, all of the ships that got destroyed, all of the people who get killed. By the way, let's point out, the Lilliputian who is explaining this to Gullilver does not see any problem with these fights. As a matter of fact, he sees this as kind of the right way to see it. Fascinating. However, last line on page 608. They have now equipped a numerous fleet and are just preparing to make a descent upon us, and His Imperial Majesty, placing great confidence in your valor and strength, hath commanded me to lay this account of his affairs before you. In other words, notice the idea here is simply that we need your help to destroy Blefuscu. You have to be on our side. Of course, Gulliver drops in from outer space and looks at this and goes, really? We're going to slaughter each other over which end of an egg to break open. By the way, just as a spiral review, take a look over here on page 608, denotation and word choice. Read the vocabulary word schism in context, and then what conclusion can you draw about the positive and negative nuances of schism? Schism, of course, this division. Again, for Swift, we're talking about religious divisions. Now, of course, we can ask this question in 3b. People today still, right, will make comments about other people because of their religion, right? We will fight over whether one person has a certain kind of religion versus another kind of religion, looked at from the outside. Like, for example, just imagine for a moment, you drop in from outer space and you studied Worland High School and the things that we fight over in the halls of Worland High School, the things in our community that matter to us so much that we do not like each other. Skin color? Religious preference or no religious preference? Political differences, and people fight over this kind of stuff. Obviously, Swift is pointing out the silliness of it all, right? I desired, I'm with you now on 609 again, the secretary to present my humble duty to the emperor and to let him know that I thought it would not become me, who was a foreigner, to interfere with parties. In other words, you can imagine, and Swift is like, dude, I'm just staying out of it, right? But I was ready with the hazard of my life to defend his person and state against all invaders, right? In other words, he says, well, I'm not going to go out and kill a bunch of Blefuscus, but if they attack us, I'll defend you, type of thing, right? The Empire of Blefuscu is an island situated to the northeast side of Lilliput, from whence it is parted only by the channel of 800 yards wide. I had not yet seen it, and upon this notice of an intended invasion, I avoided appearing on that side of the coast for fear of being discovered by some of the enemy's ships, who had received no intelligence of me, all intercourse between the two empires having been strictly forbidden during the war upon pain of death, and an embargo laid by our emperor upon all vessels whatsoever. I communicated to his majesty a project I had formed of seizing the enemy's whole fleet, which, as our scouts assured us, lay at anchor in the harbor ready to sail with the first fair wind. I consulted the most experienced seamen upon the depth of the channel, which they had often plumbed, who told me that in the middle of high water it was 20 glumps deep, which is about 6 feet of European measure, and the rest of it 50 glumps at most. I walked to the northeast coast over against Blefuscu, where, lying down behind a hillock, I took out my small pocket perspective glass, his monocular, and viewed the enemy's fleet at anchor, consisting of about 50 men of war and a great number of transports. I then came back to my house and gave order, for which I had a warrant, for a great quantity of the strongest cable and bars of iron. The cable was about as thick as pack thread, and the bars of the length and size of a knitting needle. I tripled the cable to make it stronger. He weaves the cable together. And for the same reason, I twisted 3 of the iron bars together, bending the extremities into a hook. Having thus fixed 50 hooks to as many cables, I went back to the northeast coast and, putting off my coat, shoes, and stockings, walked into the sea in my leathern jerkin about a half an hour before high water. I waded with what haste I could and swam in the middle about 30 yards until I fell ground. I arrived at the fleet in less than half an hour. So in other words, he sees this Blefuscu fleet out there, right, the enemies of the Lilliputes, and he says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to solve the problem by getting rid of the Blefuscu ships before they can even begin this stupid war. So, you know, he's got these little, he's got this string that, of course, will be like cables because he's in a country of small people. The enemy was so frightened when they saw me that they leaped out of their ships and swam to shore, where they could not be fewer than 30,000 souls. Again, the perspective is fascinating. It's like we always take the perspective when we watch these invasion movies. Think about this. We always take the perspective of the human, don't we? Think about that. So, for example, they can fly in a ship that is going to completely cover the sky over New York City, over the entire city. That's how big one of their ships is. And we always take the perspective of what it would feel like if we were human looking up into the sky and it was completely covered by a ship. But what would it feel like from the other side? The other side, for example, might say, we sent out one of our smallest transports to take a look at this place. And up in space somewhere, they have a spaceship that's 5 times larger than our planet. And what would that feel like? And then you got all of these people down below who are going to shoot little weapons at our ship to somehow try to destroy our ship. Ha ha, it's kind of funny. You get this notion of perspective. Let's write it down at 2a really quickly, another major message of Gulliver's Travels. Everything is about perspective. Everything is about the perspective that you see it from, right? He continues, I then took my tackling, and fastening a hook to the hole at the prow of each, I tied all the cords together at the end. While I was thus employed, the enemy discharged several thousand arrows, many of which stuck in my hands and face, and besides the excessive smart, gave me much disturbance in my work. So in other words, they're shooting thousands and thousands of arrows at him, but he's so huge that it's just sticking in his hand a little bit. It'd be almost like someone just kind of, pricking you a little bit with a pin or something like that. By the way, over on page 609, before we leave this page, let's look at the literature and context box, the vocabulary of religious conflict. The word schism, which Swift uses in describing the conflict between the big enders and little enders, is an important term in the history of religious conflict. The term comes from the Greek word schism, meaning divide, and it can mean simply to cleave or cut. Traditionally, it's been applied to a split in an organized group, especially a church, the act of trying to cause such a split or a sect formed by the split. By using this word in describing the controversy between the big enders and little enders, Swift signals readers that his fiction refers to a significant religious conflict, obviously, between Catholics and Protestants, right? And then the question, what further divisions have come as a result of Lilliput's schism in religion, is a legitimate question. Let's pause there for a moment and then we will return. Thank you.
Oops.